Okay, here we are. We're going to start training on um, the appraisal contingency to the addendum and the price escalation addendum, two very commonly used forms, especially in these crazy markets that we have had over the past few years. We'll call them commonplace markets now. So let me get to a share screen. Hang on, technical difficulties. Okay, so I just put together a dot loop, so I have all my forms right here. The forms that I have in front of me today for our discussion is going to be the appraisal contingency, the price escalation addendum, and the standard agreement. I've also included the guidelines for each of those. So who's used the appraisal contingency to the agreement of sale? Anybody? Please sound
I have.
off.
I have.
All right, why do we use it?
Um, Many reasons, but maybe basically to verify value of a property.
Right? We don't want to expose our client to overpaying for a property if they're not ready to do so. Some people are ready to overpay for a property. They're perfectly okay with it. Um, but the appraisal contingency can have some other uses too. They redid this here, if and for your knowledge, you can go down here and you can see when it was revised. Revised May of 25 and released 9 of 25. So we've been using this one for, 6, 7 months now. And still, if you don't use this every day, you're going to have questions with it. The most recent version prior to this was super confusing. I think this is
Hmm.
much better, right? Why, you know, we don't need to dwell on why that one sucked, but it didn't do all the things that we needed it to do. But it allows us to make sure that our clients don't overpay. It also uh, lets our sellers know if we want that we are willing to overpay. Who would be willing to overpay? It just depends. It's a measure of enthusiasm. So let me get into the reading part here, where it says the agreement of sale is contingent upon the property being appraised in a manner that is acceptable to the underwriter if the buyer is doing financing at a value that is equal to or higher than, and then we get three choices. The most common one of those is the purchase price, right? We just want to make sure it's worth what we're paying for it. Do I need to go any further into that one? I don't think so. That's pretty straightforward. Can anybody tell me what the purpose of B is? Why would I care that it would appraise for a predetermined amount less than a purchase price?
If your client was potentially like paying 5,000 and over the appraised price.
Right?
Like a waiver, I guess, right? AKA
Exactly. This
okay.
this is what
Or a gap, I think. Yeah.
this is a gap. Right. This is nice because, and we'll go into this on the next form, the price escalation addendum. No prior version of the appraisal contingency allowed us to float the appraisal price. It was always a fixed price. This allows the appraisal price to float with that purchase price. So if we know that we have $10,000 to work with, an extra $10,000, then we can float it with the purchase price, saying that we'll pay, that we only need the property to appraise for $10,000 less than the purchase price, and then we'll cover the rest. So if we escalate, if we have an offer price at 300 and we escalate to 350, and we know that we have, as long as the financing comes through, we're going to have an extra 10 grand or so to play with. We can put 10,000 less than purchase price. Now, here's the practical application portion of this. If you are escalating to a higher degree like that, and you have a stack of cash that you're willing to use to make up an appraisal shortfall, I insist that you do a worst case scenario cost estimate for your client so that they know how much they're going to have to bring at that point. What are some of the variables involved? Well, what you know, if it appraises for that 340, are they going to have enough to close that gap? That's what we need to have in here. Now, C
Justin,
is, yes, go ahead.
I understand the basic concept of the gap, but okay. Well, it was 350.
Yep,
And let's say it appraises for 340. Now, if you've already put that number in there, let's say it's $10,000. So they've already committed to 10,000, right?
yep.
Okay. What if it appraises for, you offer 350, but it appraises for 320? You're still only bringing 10, right?
At that point, excellent. Thank you for the segue. If the minimum appraisal value from paragraph 1 is met, or if the appraisal is not completed within the contingency period, the buyer accepts the property.
Right.
4, if the minimum appraisal value is not met, then we have the option to either take it, leave it, or negotiate it.
Okay.
The old appraisal gap language that a lot of people used to jam into page 14 kind of pre-commits your buyer to a totally unknown quantity.
hmm
And a lot of brokers, myself included, and attorneys were uncomfortable with committing buyers to that unknown quantity. Well,
Right.
We don't know what's going to happen. What if it appraises for, we offered 300, we were willing to go up to 350, but for some unknown reason it appraises for 280. If there's something we weren't seeing there, I don't know. You just don't want to commit people to unknown stuff. You just don't have all the information.
Right.
And this allows us that to go in with that. Now,
Okay. Well, I'm okay. Sorry.
does that make sense?
Sort of. So, okay. But if you put the 10,000 there
Yep.
in this example, and it comes in at 320, you have said now you're going to bring 330, and you now have to refer to the part where you either negotiate, terminate, or whatever it is, those three options. But
Yep.
you committed in this case to 330, but we still now have a 20K gap that we have to negotiate. Is that right?
Right. Right.
Okay,
Because
so whatever it appraises for, let's say it appraises way low, you're offering to bring it up 10K and that's it.
yeah.
Okay. And then it refers back to the old, the way it's always been, where you negotiate, drop the price, or terminate.
Or you have that 10K gap. If it appraises for 340, you're going to move forward with the sale.
Right.
If if it appraises for 330, then we have to go back to the drawing board because, well, maybe the seller can't sell at that price.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Now, C, you can do whatever you want. Maybe we want to make sure that this property is being offered for 100. We know it's a distressed situation, and I want to make sure that if I bail these people out, the sellers, I need to make sure that I'm going to be able to get a return on my money. I want to make sure it appraises for 115. I can put that in. Or I just want to make sure it appraises for 100,000 and it's being offered for 200. I just want to make sure that it's I'm going to be able to, do some other financial maneuver down the road that it's worth at least half of what I'm paying for. You can put any number you want in there so that you can get your message across. And that's why I like this form. It doesn't assume to know what all potential hypothetical situations are. And it gives you the flexibility to do what you need to do there.
Meaning, real life example here. I had a property listed for 620.
Yep.
There were multiple offers. The one that won the day was the agent put 620 in there in the C, but it escalated to 646. So it was starting to get a little dicey with appraisal.
Yep.
But we're saying that it had to appraise, they needed it to appraise for 620, but no matter what it came in at, they're committing to 646.
Yep.
What if it had appraised for 610?
Revert to number 4.
Okay.
If the minimum appraisal value is not met,
Okay.
they can take it, leave it, or negotiate. But
So we're not saying there's a definite number there in that case, because 620 to 646, what is that? $26,000?
yeah,
So we're not saying they're bringing 26,000. They're saying it has to appraise for this, or it's like you're not adding that escalation money to the 620, to the
right,
615 or
right,
610 rather.
correct.
Okay.
Yep, we're just going to regroup and gather our information. I'm cool if it crosses this hurdle. If it doesn't cross that hurdle, then let's regroup and go from there.
So it behooves you to put a slightly lower number in there, yes, as a best practice. I know we can do whatever we want, but
Well, it depends on the motivations of the buyer. If the buyer wants to show that they are committed and their enthusiasm is off the chart, like in your case, listed at 620, I just need to make sure, that it appraises for 600 so that I can do my home equity or whatever kind of financing maneuver I need to do. I don't care what happens after that.
okay. Okay. So in this case, their number was 620.
Yep.
But you basically, that number, you have to meet that number, regardless of how high it goes or what the dollar amount is. You have to meet that number in that line before anything else applies.
Right.
Okay.
Now, if the minimum value, let me go through this line by line. Contingency period is 30 days if not specified. Here's a caveat for that. In busy markets, is 30 days always enough to get the job done? No,
No.
especially if you're talking about um, a unique property. It's a working, it's a gentleman's farm, which is a non-money producing farm, right? It's just a hobbyist farm where you keep a couple horses, a couple cows, a couple goats. It doesn't make money, so it's still residential, right? But it's 40 acres. All sounds pretty reasonable until you put it in Juniata County where no appraisers live? Are you going to be able to get an appraiser out there in 30 days? You don't know. It depends on the bank's underwriting policies, how they order, who's on their rotation. If you're dealing with a lender from the West Coast who doesn't have a lot of business here, they may not have a deep bench for appraisers, so 30 days could be a problem. Be aware of that timeline. Okay, so within the contingency period, the buyer may obtain an appraisal of the property from a PA certified appraiser. If the buyer is obtaining financing, the appraiser will be selected by the lender. If the buyer is not obtaining financing, the appraiser shall be selected by the buyer. And the seller will provide access to the property to the appraiser who is elected. That's all pretty straightforward, in my opinion. Now, if the minimum appraised value is met, meaning we're all cheering, or if the appraisal was not completed within the contingency period, which means everything got complicated, the buyer accepts the property at the purchase price and further agrees to complete settlement at the purchase price by any of the following or a combination thereof at the buyer's sole discretion. Provide additional funds at settlement, meaning close the gap in cash. Adjust the loan amount stated in the mortgage or financing contingency to correct the loan to value ratio if that is warranted. Or adjust the loan to value ratio. But the buyer's election of any option above shall prevail over the terms of the mortgage or finance contingency paragraph of the agreement of sale. So realistically, what happens if the appraisal doesn't get done in the time frame that we all thought about? As a buyer, are you feeling good about that? Nah, you're probably having some very serious discussions with your buyer's agent. So buyer's agent, don't let that happen. If you're the listing agent, you're like, what? Tough. Suck it up. That's what the form says.
Can't you get an extent if all parties agree?
If all parties agree, if everybody was watching their timelines,
Right.
if everybody's watching their timelines. And Joanne, I'm here to tell you, not everybody is paying attention to their timelines.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So in this example, the 30 days has lapsed, basically.
Well,
This
yeah,
in your situation, we haven't had nobody did the change in terms beforehand.
yeah, we don't want that to happen. So that's why I'm saying everybody be aware of that. Don't let time frames sneak up on you, because you know you could be in a tough spot when it comes to your commission. You could be in a tough spot when it comes to complaints with the state about professionalism. It just, that's your duty I mean, that's one of your top duties is to keep aware of those time frames. Don't let anything lapse, okay? Be careful with those. That goes in every situation, not just this one. Now, if the minimum appraisal value is not met, the buyer will deliver a copy of the appraisal report to the seller. There's no other time where we are committed to delivering a copy of the appraisal unless there's repairs to be done. But the buyer will, within that contingency period, what contingency period? 30 days. They're going to terminate the agreement of sale by written notice with all deposit monies returned to the buyer according to the terms of the agreement, or enter into a mutually agreeable or acceptable written agreement with the seller. If the buyer does not terminate the agreement of sale or enter into a mutually acceptable written agreement with the seller within the contingency period, the buyer waives this contingency. This is not like a home inspection contingency where you get 10 days and then you get 5 days to consider it and then you get 2 days to terminate. Everybody with me? That's why this 30 days is important. It's all inclusive. You either have to terminate or you're stuck with the property. That's what I want you to know here. You have to do all your negotiation and everything in here. So 30 days doesn't seem as long as it does, initially. If you have an appraisal contingency, please communicate to the lender that you want to get that appraisal going as quickly as possible. If it is a unique property in a distant location, make sure that you communicate this with everybody and really consider extending that 30 days. Okay? Any questions on the basic use of the appraisal contingency?
Hey,
Okay.
Justin, Mike Champ, I had a quick question, not related to that document, just a general question for you and the group.
Yep.
Since we're talking about, deadlines and all that, and I am a new agent. I have my license for about 3 weeks now. So is as I kind of sort through all of this, is there or do we own like a software or some system that kind of helps us pulling in all this information as we're writing contracts, all these critical milestones and dates that schedule that for us? Does anything like that exist? Do we own anything like that, or is that more just a manual? You go through the documents, throw them in your calendar yourself type thing.
That's a manual thing.
Okay.
I don't know of any there. It sounds like a great use for AI, but I'm not very trusting. I will go in and I will pull all these dates manually myself and put
Gotcha.
them, once we get under contract, day one, I'm mapping out date of acceptance and then every contingency period that goes from then until closing. I'm putting that into my calendar right then.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just curious.
Sounds like you can make some money if you built that to be reliable. Good luck.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Um, I've always said, if you want to get rich, sell shit to realtors. So this is a peek at the guideline. It gives you some the guidelines. It gives you some examples, some practice tips. Talks about the contingency period. Talks about what happens when and what happens if. So that is how these guidelines are set up. Okay.
Hey, Justin,
You.
did you cover anything about, because I feel like there's a misconception with the appraisal contingency if it appraises for less than the value?
Uh, Give me your actual question.
Uh, so you fill out the appraisal contingency, right?
Yeah.
Let's go back. Yep. And in it, you write that, so when you write it has to appraise for $10,000 less than the listing price, what happens if it appraises for $15,000
Yeah,
less?
we did talk about that
You did?
in which is at that point we go back to the drawing board. The seller has the right or the buyer has the right to terminate. The buyer has the right to negotiate, and the seller always has the right to say no. I can't pay off my mortgage with that amount of money. Or no, that's insulting. Or no, that's a complete answer. But the way it used to be, once upon a time, in general practice, was it was felt that this could serve as a backdoor appraisal contingency. Does everybody who's had their license for 10 or so years remember how that worked? That if you put in a loan to value ratio, a loan amount, and the appraisal came in such a fashion that that wasn't met, that we all had the right to terminate based on the mortgage contingency.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the case. or that is not the case today, the buyer does not have the right to terminate. So that's why we use the appraisal contingency so that our buyers don't get stuck without the right to terminate should the appraisal come in short. We will always have the right with an appraisal contingency to terminate the deal if the appraisal comes in short, or at least renegotiate the price on with the complete information of that appraisal. Is that what you want to talk about, Christy?
Yep. Yep. Big misconception there. Yep, for sure.
Now, let's talk about the price escalation addendum. There's some other misconceptions with that one. Can anybody tell me about the last time they used a price escalation addendum?
I'm about to close on one.
Okay. How many offers did you have?
I have the buyer.
Okay.
Fortunately, we won, but we escalated, and we escalated in in my opinion, and I'm sure you'll get to this in competitive increments.
Okay.
And we did go all the way to we met our escalation.
Okay. Fully escalated. Okay.
Fully
So
escalated. Yep.
this is one of my favorite tools. I started using it a long, long time ago, and I don't know that everybody knew about its existence until like post-COVID, it became almost a part of the contract. Am I right? Like we were fighting on every deal, and I think that the price escalation addendum came very commonplace. However, not everybody, fully understands its application or uses it to full effect. So this addendum is presented to the seller as a part of the buyer's offer to purchase the seller's property. Should the seller accept the buyer's offer, the buyer and seller will have entered into a binding agreement under the terms of the agreement and or other addenda, with the exception of any terms addressed in this addendum, which will be if prior to the seller's acceptance of the buyer's offer to purchase, the seller receives from another prospective purchaser a bona fide offer to purchase the property with terms acceptable to the seller. Now, let's break that down a bit. With terms acceptable to the seller, is the seller not going to use another offer to try and escalate your addendum? They're going to try to escalate. And a net purchase price, that's the purchase price less any identified seller assist and seller financial concessions equal to or higher than the net purchase price offered by the buyer. The buyer agrees that the purchase price of the buyer's offer is increased so that net purchase price is X amount higher. The way I explain this to clients is if we find ourselves in a competitive situation, we agree to meet and then exceed any competing offer up to a predetermined threshold by a predetermined step. That's how I paraphrase that. Does anybody do that differently? So, first thing we have to do is know that we're talking about nets. So if there's seller help or you're asking for commission, we're talking about the net. We're not talking about gross. We're adjusting that and then we're escalating based on the net. I urge my clients to go heavy on that escalation step because you need it to be compelling. If you're asking for an inspection and your competition is not asking for an inspection and you're trying to escalate by 500 bucks, is your $500 enough to offset a home inspection? Probably not. I tell my people that a home inspection is worth, I don't know, what can a good home inspector find on your average property? Probably $2,500 in repairs, even in a property that's in good shape. So is $500 going to offset that? No. I mean, $500 isn't going to offset them liking their name better. Or $500 doesn't move the needle on anything. The least step that you should consider is $1,000, and I don't think that's even that compelling. What do you guys think?
I agree.
Kristen, what was your escalation step that you won on this last one?
$5,000.
5,000. That's the one that's closing tomorrow or Friday?
Monday, but yeah.
Okay, 5,000. That's a compelling step. That moves the needle. I think 25, 1,500, 2,500, those things, that makes a difference. Now, if you're talking a $150,000 property, a $1,500 step is pretty compelling. If you're talking a $600,000, is $1,500 a big deal? Maybe not. So you need to take that into account. Your client's going to say, I don't know, what should I do? How high should I escalate? How do you steer that or steer around that conversation?
I just used the reasons that we just talked about. Like, listen, you want to make an impact.
You want to make an
Um,
impact. How are you going to
and it,
feel if you don't get this house? You know,
yes, exactly.
I always I always
Over
attack my
500 bucks. Yeah.
right. Because you're not necessarily committing to going to, if the asking price is 500 and you're talking about committing up to 550, what's everybody's biggest fear? Being a sucker or overpaying, right? Then you bring in the mentality though of you're only outbidding the closest bidder by $2,500. So if somebody else bids to 540, you're going to 542.5. You're only going just enough to win. It's not like you're going to the fully escalated price right off the bat. And that's why this is a useful tool because you're not outbidding the lowest bidder or the average price. You're outbidding somebody else that's actually in the race with you, and you're just getting there far enough. My wife and I searched for a house for a year and a half to be in the neighborhood that we wanted to be in. Walkable to the library and walkable to the college and walkable to the Y and the downtown. Um, and the property was listed for 285. And I looked at my wife and I said, "Do you want this one?" And she said, "This is the one." Okay, so I know if I don't win this house, I'm going to be looking for another year and a half. So I was ready to go, but I didn't want to be stupid about it. I used an escalation and it won. So it's important to understand those motivations. Now, if one or more of the competing offers include similar price escalation terms, this automatic increase will be applied to the maximum escalated sale price of the highest competing escalation term, not to exceed the maximum purchase price stated above. So if we have three escalation clauses on a $500,000 property, one escalates to 525, one escalates to 535, and one escalates to 545. We just blew past 525, right? Now we're going to see who the winner is between 535 and 545. If we're talking about $2,500 increments, we've got one at 535 and one at 537.5. Everybody, it's understand that. Because we're not to exceed the maximum purchase price stated above on ours, which is 535. That takes us to 535. The next one comes in at 537.5. Now they're going to measure out the other terms. Maybe ours is conventional at 535 and the other one's FHA at, well, no, the other one's VA at 537.5. What's your seller want? Maybe it's 535 cash versus 537.5 in financing. These are the things that we need to take into account. If the purchase price is increased based on the terms of paragraph 2 above, the terms of the mortgage contingency paragraph in the agreement of sale are changed as follows. Because when we're escalating, it can move some other stuff that's pretty important and already fixed in the agreement of sale. You might be waiving the mortgage contingency and getting rid of that. I think that's a pretty uncommon election. I don't see that one, but I think it could be very compelling that I'm making this addition. I'm making my initial offer with financing, but if I find out I'm competing, I'm just going to waive it. The loan amount stated in the mortgage contingency is increased by the amount necessary to keep that loan to value ratio constant. Or the first X amount of that difference between the original purchase price and the new purchase price is going to be paid in cash. So you can leave that financing contingency alone. You're going to bring cash to the table. And then within X amount of days of the execution date, we're going to get you a new pre-approval to cover that escalated price. And then you select whether or not an appraisal contingency is attached. Those changes to the appraisal contingency allow it to now, for the first time, play well with the price escalation addendum, and you can have them float together and include that appraisal gap. Even though this blank right here on line 21 can also serve as an appraisal gap, because you're going to bring that escalated price, you're going to bring that difference in cash, which doesn't affect the financing. Now, to make this good, the seller is going to provide a copy of the competing offer to the buyer no later than the time the seller returns a copy of the executed agreement to the buyer. The seller may remove the name of the other prospective purchaser, but may not remove any financial terms, including the purchase price or any seller assist or other seller financial concessions. So you should be receiving that so that you can prove to your buyer what's going on. Have there been shenanigans? There have been shenanigans. That's why they require that this is provided to satisfy your buyer that they're not being taken advantage of. Now, the seller will fill out the new purchase price as calculated in here to make that change. Does this require any further initials from the buyer? Anyone? Did you all fall asleep on me? When filled out and submitted by the buyer, the seller can execute this and we have a contract. No further initials are required. It is a binding deal. That's what it says up here. In paragraph 1, it's binding. It's done. We have a done deal. That's why these changes are included here. They automatically update the agreement of sale. And this right here on line 43 automatically updates the sale price. So there's no need to go back and make any changes When this is submitted by the buyer completely and signed by the seller, we have a deal, no further initials required. Got it?
So Justin, I have a question then.
Yes.
I've heard though in the past, some people have went back to the contract and maybe made adjustments in the sense of the purchase price, mainly because of certain instances where the appraiser did not get this escalation addendum, knowing that it escalated higher, and therefore ended up having a negative impact on the appraisal price.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions for that or?
Yeah, I've seen it happen and it's so frustrating. Um, I would urge everyone, when you send the contract to the bank, send it in the same scan as this appraisal contingency. Make sure that it's included in the same document, not as a separate attachment, so that when it gets forwarded to the appraiser, they get the full picture. Should it make a difference? It absolutely should not make a difference, but the appraiser is working off a initial offer price, working towards that. Then they find, they just don't have all the information. I would communicate that, clearly. Now, here's some questions posed to the legal hotline. Comes up in two different contexts. The seller didn't honor our escalation clause. Has anybody had that scenario?
Justin, it's Joanne.
Hey,
I've,
Joanne.
hey, I've seen where they don't, some sellers don't want escalation clauses. They just want your best offer. So, um, tell me your question again. I'm sorry.
Well, they didn't honor our escalation clause is, what the legal hotline says. So I think if a seller doesn't welcome escalation clauses, they don't understand escalation clauses, and that's probably the fault of their agent. When done properly, your escalation clauses can really get you um, some really nice results for your client, right?
Right. So even if I see that in a listing and my buyer client wants to add an escalation clause, I'll add it anyway because it's my client, not the seller. And that's his or her agent's problem to deal with.
Now, does the seller have to play color within the lines of an escalation clause?
No,
No, they don't.
no.
Um, they may. What are your options when you receive an offer as a seller?
Accept, reject, or negotiate.
Exactly. So they can accept that price escalation. They can they can reject the offer, or they can choose to make a counter offer to any one of these deals that they like. They might have 14 offers, 7 of them have escalation clauses. They can choose one of them and counter it. They can even accept one that's not the highest price, right? And I know a lot of agents and a lot of buyers get bent out of shape whenever they find out that a property sold for less than what their offer was. But, that happens. And also, I want you to take into account when you have escalation clauses, you priced it at what? You priced it at $400,000. You have an escalation clause up to $500,000. It might as well be $1 million if if they have an appraisal contingency attached, the most it's going to sell for is what the appraised value is, right? Sometimes people go into this, um, they try to buy the offer. It's kind of like they're bluffing because they know it's not going to appraise much higher. And they let the chips fall where they may because of the appraisal contingency. Has anybody seen those scenarios? So the seller can counter based on whatever they want. And I do this routinely if I have multiple offers, even if I have escalation clauses. Let's say I have, and I've done this with, Susan, I've done this with many of you where we get ourselves into multiple offer situations and then it's sorting through everything. First of all, what offers don't we want? Are there condition issues that we want to take into account? Let's look at those and maybe eliminate the ones that are going to rely heavily on condition. Now that we're dealing with these price escalations, make sure that we understand how they are escalating. We're escalating net to net. Make sure that we do that correctly. And then your seller has all of these escalations. I don't want to talk to them about, I'll tell them where it started and where it wound up and how it got there and make sure that they understand that progression. But then we'll lay out the options. This one is a conventional loan with 25% down. This one is, um, this one's an FHA loan with 3.5% down. What are the differences and what could that mean for you? What happens if we get into trouble on an appraisal? Who's going to have the resources to make this work? Um, we don't want to be talking about um, the personal aspects of those offers, though. Any more questions on these on these materials? Any other scenarios associated with them that you want to chat about?
Hey, April's question, I wanted to follow up on that. Get into trouble if you change the estimated price on the agreement of sale, just as kind of a belt and suspenders situation. So you send the whole thing with the price escalation, you change the sales amount to the escalated price on page 2. Is that a big no-no?
No, I don't think it is a big no-no. It just what it does is it leaves the door open. I don't have any problem with it, personally. In fact, I'd be lying if I said I didn't do that on more than one occasion, because I wanted to make sure that that was all communicated clearly. It just winds up, you know, according to the paperwork, being a counteroffer rather than an accepted escalation addendum.
Right. And if it
But
were that situation, could it just be that? Could you just clear out the paperwork?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
ultimately, if you send it back for initials from everybody, what's happening? You're leaving the door open.
Right. Okay.
Because, and that bites you, uh, that bites you in the most unexpected scenarios where, I'm sending this back for final initials and now all of a sudden an agent on the other side has disappeared and no longer is communicating. Um, or they want to redo a deal, or they want to change something. There's something to be said on one side of it. This addendum is signed. We have a complete offer, or do we want to tighten up the paperwork for the purpose of the lender? That's going to be a case by case thing. What I'm
Gotcha.
saying is you don't have to go back, cross that out, get that initialed, change the loan to value ratio, on the financing block. You don't have to go and, change numbers in these, 3, 4, 5 different areas when you sign that properly executed price escalation addendum with one signature. That's a done deal. At 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, you don't have to send that back to a buyer's agent for final initials that you might not get until noon the next day.
Good
It,
point.
it
Okay.
takes out that waiting period. So
Yep.
it depends on how critical speed and communication are in any given situation, and those situations are always changing, right? All right, cool. Not our most glamorous contracts or forms, but I hope that gives you a little clarity on them. If you want to talk about them, hit me up. And remember, parealtors.com has your guidelines for preparation and use on both of those. And then also, if you go in there and search those, for example, if you search price escalation addendum, then you get the best of the legal hotline, and it tells you some of the things that you need to worry about on a price escalation addendum. So you type in any topic into parealtors.org and you get all kinds of fun stuff to think about. If there's nothing else, I appreciate you for being here, and hit me up if you have any questions. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you.
Bye now.